Hello and welcome to CBC Arts Exhibitionists. I'm your host, Amanda Paris. Headlines of impending war, sharp political divides, and a royal family torn apart are constant reminders that we are living in a time where the world feels very divided. As a result, we thought it would be a good idea to create an episode dedicated to community. Today you'll see an artist using masks to bridge gaps between groups, Professor Lise gives us the 101 on historic art movements, and a tribute to Ottawa's Chinatown served up on an unconventional platter. I hope you're ready, because this is CBC Arts Exhibitionists. Oscar Wilde once wrote, "Man is least himself when he talks in his own person. Give him a mask and he will tell you the truth." Katie Green is an artist who has taken those words to heart. She's using masks as a way to not only give people in her community a voice, but also to bridge the gaps between groups in one Calgary neighborhood. Take a look.
The word mask to me means the opportunity to explore or the opportunity to express. I know in my personal experiences when wearing a mask, I've felt more myself than I have without it. I feel more comfortable, I feel more liberated, I feel connected into my body in a way that I don't if I'm more conscious of my face. My name is Katie Green and I'm a visual artist here in Calgary, and I'm going to be doing the next installation for the East Village Riverwalk public art installation called Bridge. My incentive for wanting to apply for this project was to think about how to sort of bridge the gaps between these different community groups, or have a piece of public work that could help facilitate conversation and connection. I'm working with the local social worker for East Village, Calgary Family Services, and then all of the new residents, in the new buildings, and then all of the older residents in the older developments. So a lot of those developments are, they're low-income housing. So a lot of seniors live in these buildings. So I'm trying to sort of facilitate and connect with all these different groups. As I take into consideration what connection means, I think I'm just trying to approach this really authentically and honestly, really actively listen to these different individuals in terms of why this project could be interesting to them, how it could benefit them, because everyone will have a different, a different approach.
So couture.
I love it. Because of what you actually shared in your journaling about like that icy feel, that kind of cold feel, and I think this is a big reason why we chose like this gray and this concrete. It's really rooted in the process. So yes, there will be a final image that will be the final result of this artwork, which will be a photograph of each participant in their mask. But I think that the biggest thing is the process of how that person made that mask, how that object can stand in for a tool for that person to share a bit of themselves. There will be 3 workshops in May, and the first workshop will be an opportunity for all the participants to meet one another, share conversation with each other, and then pick an image to create a mask from. And that image is based off of the technique that I have done to create my masks. So all of those little portraits, I'm going to be bringing about 50 of them in, and each participant will have the opportunity to look at those portraits and choose one that resonates with them. And then that portrait will start conversation in terms of why do you want to embody that character? What does that character say about who you are? And that portrait, like the same way I've done my masks in the past, will become a mask. Some of the stuff that's coming up is like about what the mask means to them individually, about the different masks that we wear. Some people are sharing pretty specific stories, which like finding really interesting. It's like, yeah, I feel really good about it. And the second workshop, we will be building the masks. Third workshop, all the participants will get to see their mask, meet their mask, and actually go through some embodiment exercises in terms of how does it feel when that person puts that mask on. And then we'll, continue exploring, well, how does that person want to be seen? Where do they want to be photographed? And how does that relate to their story, which we'll be developing throughout those workshops. Public art doesn't have to be something that everyone likes either. I think that that's okay. But if you remain curious about it and in a state of wanting to ask questions, I think that that just creates really good and meaningful conversation.
Hi, my name is Anna Eyler and I'm an artist from Ottawa and currently living in Montreal.
My name is Nicolas Lapointe and I'm an artist currently living in Montreal.
We are your exhibitionists in residence this week. You will be seeing clips from a variety of video works that we've made over the past years. Some of these works are part of larger sculptural installations, whereas others are standalone video works.
In general, Anna is responsible for the 3D modeling. I work on sound and video editing. The content is built collaboratively. We hope you enjoy.
Coming up, Professor Lise breaks down why you can't join the Surrealist movement.
Hey guys, maybe this story will sound familiar. So a friend of mine was having dinner with his family last week, and his uncle made a big announcement. He said, "I'm an abstract expressionist painter now." And then he showed everybody a huge canvas covered in paint splatter. This video is about why that dude definitely is not an abstract expressionist, and why you can't be one either. Hi, I'm Professor Lise. I have 89 BAs, 42 masters, and 13.5 PhDs. And I'm here today to tell you why the names of art movements like abstract expressionism matter. A movement, by the way, is what happens when a bunch of people get together and say they're making art, and everybody else says, okay. Let's get into it. Remember Cubism, the form of art pioneered by art history's top douche bro Pablo Picasso and his bud, George Braque. They spent a lot of time painting portraits, musical instruments, and tables at cafes. But the way they did it was pretty radical. In a world that was obsessed with painting the world around them as realistically as possible, they were making paintings that looked really flat, not very realistic at all, and almost like they were trying to show you every possible angle of an object or a person at the same time. So how did Cubism get its name? Like a lot of art movements, that story begins with a crappy, resentful person. Not Picasso, but a critic. In the case of Cubism, it was a guy named Louis Vaucel. He went to see work by Braque and Picasso and was less than impressed at how different from all the other art it looked. So when he wrote about their paintings, he talked about the work as cubic weirdness, and he described the work as bizarrerie cubique. Picasso and Braque took that insult and ran with it. Cubism remained the name of the movement, and these two guys and some of their friends upped their game. They kept on making paintings that threw linear perspective in the trash, played around with ideas of space and time, and Cubism became a hallmark of what we call modern art. This story brings up an important point. Yes, the word Cubism covers the visual style of paintings by Braque and Picasso, but the word has more specificity than that. And by specificity, what I mean is, the word doesn't just describe art that looks like it's made of little cubes. It describes a time, the early 20th century, a place, Paris, and a set of ideas. They were trying to take traditional ways of painting apart while being rebels who ate cheese and baguette. An art movement is specific. It's a specific person in a specific time and place doing something specific. Here's another example. Just because somebody makes a painting of a fish eating a pancake doesn't make them a surrealist painter. If you're painting a clock melting in a desert where light bulbs are having a sandwich party, that could seem like a pretty surreal painting. But here's why fish, pancakes, light bulbs, and sandwiches do not equal surrealism. Surrealism, the movement that started in the 1920s in Europe, was a literary movement as well as a painterly and sculptural one. It was founded by a poet named André Breton, and it was a movement movement meant to look at things that were irrational or nonsensical, to protest the sort of art and the sort of thinking that came from logic and reason. Surrealists hoped they could instead make art that came straight from their unconscious, that they could create a main line from their hand to the deepest part of their brain. And that's how you get works in the 1920s like these, teacups made out of fur, or a painting of a pipe that is not a pipe. Confusing stuff. Let's try one more. You may be hearing the word minimalism lately, especially while your uncle is throwing away all his possessions because he watched 40 episodes of Marie Kondo and now fancies himself a minimalist. It's not true. He's not a minimalist. Minimalism, what some people might call the most boring art movement that ever existed, emerged in America in the 1960s, kind of named by a British writer named Walheim, who was discussing this new form of art that used super simple elements. He called it minimal art. It mostly involved surly men like Donald Judd, who made things that looked like boxes, and who liked looking really serious while drinking wine, or Agnes Martin, who based all of her paintings on a precise grid. Minimalism was a form of abstract art, and it was trying to do some of the same stuff Cubism did before it, like getting away from the idea that art should be imitating the natural world. As we've just learned, art movements are specific to a time, a place, a set of ideas, and a bunch of grumpy artists and even grumpier critics. They're also important. Art movements help us understand what artists were trying to accomplish. They shaped history, they could influence society, and they were a really good reason for artists doing radical things to write manifestos and get noticed by the public. They helped us distinguish different forms of art by defining unique categories. Names like Cubism and Surrealism helped the public to understand the difference between different types of art with different concerns. Okay, so why can't you or my friend's weird uncle be an abstract expressionist? It's because abstract expressionism was over by the 1960s. Uncle Doug is not trying to react to abstract painting of the early 20th century. He's not trying to take down the patriarchal system of linear perspective or find out how abstract painting can make you feel. Also, he doesn't drink nearly enough to qualify. See you and your entire family next time for more Art 101.
Thanks, Professor Lise. Cities change quickly, and it can be easy for the history of a place and a community to disappear. Don Kwan is an artist who pays homage to the restaurateurs that made their home in Canada by collecting menus from closed Chinese restaurants and transforming them into clothing. His work has exhibited in galleries and in Ottawa City Hall, but right now you're going to see it in the restaurant his family has owned for 3 generations.
So this is a dress shirt made out of Chinese takeout menus. I collected different menus from within a 150-kilometer radius of Ottawa. Our restaurant, the Shanghai restaurant's in it, but other restaurants like Wong's Palace, it was on Carling Avenue, and I was there for over 40 years. They were selling things and emptying things into a dumpster, so like old menus from 20 years ago that were just gonna be thrown in a landfill and forgotten about. So for me, was like part of history disappearing. Yeah, so the way I made it was actually like a dress shirt. I would make material and fabric out of menus. I would glue it together, and then I would cut it in the pattern of a dress shirt. And then the title is Invisible Identities, so it's almost like that. You never really pay attention to your server. They're just there to do a job, a duty. You never look beyond their task. So it's a way to kind of like put a face to the people that are working and adding to the fabric of Canadian culture. We're going on 48 years now. We're 3 generations, family owned and operated in this restaurant. My grandparents, my father, my mother, my uncle started this back in 1971, kind of in the heart of Ottawa's Chinatown. So now it's our generation, my brothers and sisters, we kind of took over. My dad had a stroke in 1994, so we all kind of dropped what we were doing to come help, and now 20, 30 odd years later, we're still around. That's a portrait of my parents when they got married. This is just a group of people in the early Chinese community gathering, on a Sunday lunch. And then below, it's a picture of my grandfather and the waiter at the time, Ken, in front of Pierre Trudeau and his family. They came into the restaurant often. He was one of the first prime ministers that actually embraced the Chinese community. The restaurant cafe was a stepping stone for a lot of Chinese immigrants to find work, employment, and also learn how to run a restaurant. Chop suey and egg rolls, and for me, it's as Canadian as maple syrup. Growing up, people are always criticizing your food, oh, that's not Chinese, authentic Chinese food. I've transformed that kind of shame into more pride because I understand the struggles those early Chinese immigrants went through to kind of create an entire genre of food that helped them support their families, created an entire community around it. My grandfather paid the head tax to arrive in Canada. My parents, they left China because of the Japanese occupation, and then immigrating to Canada and then having to, live through all of that anti-Chinese legislation and things like that. And that generation, they never really talked about it or delved into those stories. But now I think we get to reflect on it, and then now we get the privilege of kind of voicing, our opinions about that time. And I think it's a privilege for us because I don't think that generation, my ancestors, had that opportunity. I try and use a lot of my art to kind of reconcile how I work through all those issues. Yeah, so I'm very grateful I have that opportunity.
Coming up, we're heading across the pond to meet a Canadian artist who dreams up worlds inspired by London's historic past. When art and culture is accessible and surrounds you at all times, it can inspire a lot of creativity. In London, England, you can visit over 42 museums and galleries for free, and that access is something that Canadian artist Stephen Appleby Bar has definitely taken advantage of. Stephen is known for his exquisitely detailed and fantastical paintings. We met up with him in London to see how the city inspires him.
The work is storytelling. I'm effectively playing Dungeons and Dragons with myself. So I've got to have the set pieces and I've got to have the characters, and they have character sheets and they have narratives, and there's a setting and there's this and then that, and it changes. And I'm just playing a really long, ongoing game of storytelling, which I've always done with the work. So I came to London almost exactly a year ago. On our way out of Canada, we were living in Parry Sound. I was working in the country and I couldn't go to museums and kind of grab reference or get my fix, my history fix. So it was just sculpting more and more and more. And it was I don't have my museums, I don't have my reference material, so I just had to make my own. So the sculptures kept happening. And by the time I got to London, it was now I'm surrounded by all the museums I could ever want, and I'm a train ride away from Paris. So having that shored up sense of why sculpture is the way forward for my paintings is very useful, to have all that stuff kind of in the vicinity. The National Gallery is my secular church. I go there every week, for my fix. And I'm taking all this stuff, all these impressions, and I'm chewing them on the train, I'm writing and drawing, and then I'm back in the studio. The next day I'm working. I'm processing this stuff. It's going straight into the work, mainline. So that is the reason for being here. sketches for, there's probably, like, oh, here's one. You know, so like, you'll start here, and then you end up there. There's storyboards that kind of start the story, and then, you know, it ends up becoming an option. Like, I'll light this, and then put it all together here. And when you're biking around London, it kind of feels like a place like that. Yeah, there was this moment in Toronto that was so special. I was studying illustration, but I was in this scene, and it was just like, this is amazing. It was all about queer. It was just like people coming from around Toronto because they felt marginalized there or misunderstood there, so they were coming to Toronto. It was all about taking the existing traditional narrative and then just like flipping it over and like derailing it and having it just like slide into its own destruction.
If you have an artist that you think should be on CBC Arts Exhibitionists, send me a message on social media. Our handle is @CBC Arts. Tune in next week when we'll be doing another deep dive into the captivating work of Canadian artists. Peace.
Thank you.